In the last section, we learned how to find the area under the standard normal distribution curve. In this section, we're going to learn how to apply that concept to some real-world applications. Our first example says, if the scores for a test have a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15, find the probability that a score will fall below 112. So I'm going to begin by writing down the information that I'm given. So I'm told that the mean is 100, and that the standard deviation is 15. And I want to find the probability that a score will fall below 112. Now I want to work this problem using the standard normal distribution curve. The first issue that I have with that, however, is that I know that my curve, if I'm talking about the standard normal distribution curve, I know that that curve has a mean of 0. And it has a standard deviation of 1. And so this presents a problem for me if in the example we're told that the mean is 100, but the curve I want to use has a mean of 0, and our example has a standard deviation of 15, and the curve has a standard deviation of 1. It doesn't appear that I can use this standard normal distribution curve to work this problem. So the piece that I'm missing that makes that possible is the fact that, remember along this bottom line on the curve, this line across the bottom, remember that we have z-scores. So what I would do in class would be to reference you back to chapter 3, where we talked about how to convert a data value to a z-score. So if you remember, we had a formula back in chapter 3 that said that the z-score can be found by taking the value, subtracting the mean, and dividing by the standard deviation. So the first thing I want to do with you, and this is not something that we'll do on every problem, but the first thing that I want to do with you is take this mean of 100 and I want to convert it to a z-score, and I want to show you what happens. And this is part of a problem that you can kind of just watch. You don't necessarily need to write this down because, as I said, we're not going to do this on every problem, but I do want to do it here. So I need to convert 100 to a z-score. And so I'm going to use my formula. So in place of the value part of the formula, I'm going to put 100 because that is the number that I'm trying to convert. Now, the 100, it's the number that I'm converting to a z-score, but it's also the mean. So it kind of plays a double value here. So I'm going to go ahead and in place of the mean, I'm also going to put 100. And then for my standard deviation is 15. So I want you to think about what happens when we do this calculation. On the top of the fraction, we're going to get 0. So we're going to have, as our z calculation, we're going to have 0 divided by 15, which remember that if you have a fraction that has a 0 on the top, that fraction is equal to 0. So what just happened? We took a 100, which was a value, just a regular number, and when we converted it to a z-score, it turned into what? Right, it turned into 0. So 100 as a regular number is the same thing as 0 as a z-score. And so look at what happened. We have a mean of 100. Now we have the mean of 0, and we can see how that transformation is now being made. Now I could do a similar transformation for the standard deviation and show you that a standard deviation of 15 would convert to a z-score standard deviation of 1. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that part. I'm just simply going to ask that you sort of take my word for that. All right, so let's go back to our problem. So now that we have shown that yes, we really can use this standard normal distribution curve to work this problem, let's talk about how we're going to finish this one up. Okay, I'm going to write my formula back up here so we can see it. So what I would really like to be able to do in order to work this problem, since it's asking me for the probability that the score falls below 112, what I'd really like to be able to do is take that 112, come over here to my curve, and mark that off. Mark off the 112, and then shade below it, and find the area just like we learned in the last section. The problem is in marking off the 112. Remember that the 112 is just a regular number, and the numbers that we get to mark off on this curve across the bottom are z-scores. So I can't just come to my curve and mark off 112. But what I can do is to convert that 112 to a z-score first. And so that is going to be the first thing that I'm going to do. All right, and you would want to write this part down in your notes, that we are going to convert 112 to a z-score. And we're going to do that by using our formula, just like we did a second ago for the mean. Okay, so let's plug it in. All right, so for my value, remember that that is always going to be the thing that you are trying to convert. So if we're trying to convert 112, then 112 is going to go in for the value. Okay, and our mean, what is our mean in the problem? Our mean in the problem was 100, so I'm going to put 100 in for the mean. And our standard deviation is 15. So I'm going to put 15 in for that standard deviation. All right, now I'm going to calculate that z-score. So I know that 112 minus 100 on the top is going to give me 12. So I have 12 divided by 15. All right, and I'm going to go to my calculator with that and type it in. I want a decimal rounded to 2 decimal places. So this is going to be 0.80. All right, so what we have just figured out is that 112 as a regular number is going to be the same thing as 0.80 as a z-score. So now I can mark it off on my curve. So 0.80 is going to be somewhere on the right. Remember that the problem wanted us to shade below it. Okay, so I'm going to shade all of this area that's below the 0.80. And now we're going to find our area. And we're going to find our area just like we learned in the last section. Okay, so what do I need to do then? I need to go to my table and I need to look up 0.80. All right, so when I do that on the table, I should get 0.2881. Okay, so remember that if you're looking up something in the table, get rid of some of this so I can write. If you're looking up something in the table, then you are looking up the area from 0 to the number that you looked up. So that 0.2881 is going to be right here. Okay, and then remember, I'm going to get my shading back in here a little bit. All right, so remember that the entire left-hand side, because the entire left-hand side is shaded, that part is going to be 0.5. So how do we find our total area of the shaded region? We're going to add those two together. So 0.5 plus 0.2881. That's going to give me 7.7881. That is the probability that a score falls below 112. This is the same kind of probability that we talked about in Chapter 4. So remember that these numbers can be any number between 0 and 1. So this is like saying there's like a 78.8% chance that your score is below 112.